Good morning, spiritual companions. We are reading the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Continuing chapter 13, After the Passing Away, on page 523. For the first few months, Surendra contributed 30 rupees a month. As the other members joined the monastery, one by one, he doubled his contribution, which he later increased to 100 rupees. The monthly rent for the house was 11 rupees. The cook received 6 rupees a month. The rest was spent on food. The younger Gopal brought the master's bed and other articles of daily use from the garden house at Kosapur. The Brahmin who had been the cook at Kosapur was engaged for the new monastery. The first permanent member was the elder Gopal. Surat spent the nights there. In the beginning, Surat, Sashi, Baburam, Niranjan, and Kali used to visit the monastery every now and then, according to their convenience. Tarak, who had gone to Vrindavan following the master's death, returned to Calcutta after a few months and soon became a permanent member of the monastery. Rakal, Jogin, Latu, and Kali were living at Vrindavan with the Holy Mother when the monastery was started. Kali returned to Calcutta within a month, Rakal a few months later, and Jogin and Latu after a year. The householder devotees frequently visited the monastic brothers and spent hours with them in meditation and study. After a short time, Narendra, Rakal, Niranjan, Surat, Sashi, Baburam, Jogin, Tarak, Kali, and Latu renounced the world for good. Sarada Prasanna and Subodh joined them sometime later. Gangadhar, who was very much attached to Narendra, visited the moth regularly. It was he who taught the brothers the hymn sung at the evening service in the Shiva temple in Benares. He had gone to Tibet to practice austerity. Now, having returned, he lived at the monastery. Hari, at first only a visitor at the monastery, soon embraced the monastic life and thus completed the list of the master's sannyasi disciples. Footnote: the monastic names of the master's disciples who renounced the world soon after his death were as follows. Narendra became Swami Vivekananda. Rakal, Swami Brahmananda. Jogin, Swami Jogananda. Niranjan, Swami Niranjanananda. Latu, Swami Abhutananda. Baburam, Swami Premananda. Tarak, Swami Shivananda. Hari, Swami Turiyananda. Sarat, Swami Saradananda. Sashi, Swami Ramakrishnananda. Kali, Swami Abhedananda. Gangadhar, Swami Akhandananda. Gopal, the elder, Swami Advaitananda. Sarada Prasanna, Swami Trigunatidanda. Subodh, Swami Subodhananda. Tulasi, a young man of Bagbazar, had visited the master a few times, both in Calcutta and in Dakshineswar, and received his blessing. Now he began to frequent the monastery, and soon became one of its members. Formally initiated into the spiritual life by Swami Vivekananda, Tulasi also renounced the world and took the name of Swami Nirmalananda. End footnote. Surendra was indeed a blessed soul. It was he who laid the foundation of the great order later associated with Sri Ramakrishna's name. His devotion and sacrifice enabled those earnest young men to renounce the world for the realization of God. Through him, Sri Ramakrishna made it possible for them to live in the world as embodiments of his teaching, the renunciation of woman and gold, and the realization of God. The brothers lived at the Math like orphan boys. Sometimes they would not have the money to pay their house rent. Sometimes they would have no food in the monastery. Surendra would come and settle all these things. He was the big brother of the monks. Later on, when they thought of his genuine love, the members of this first Math shed tears of gratitude. The new monastery became known among the master's devotees as the Bharanagore Math. Narendra, Rakal, and the other young disciples were filled with intense renunciation. One day, Rakal's father came to the Math and asked Rakal to return home. "Why do you take the trouble to come here?" Rakal said to him. "I am very happy here. Please pray to God that you may forget me, and that I may forget you too." The young disciples said to each other, "We shall never return to the worldly life. The Master enjoined upon us the renunciation of woman and gold. How can we go back to our families?" Sashi had taken care of the daily worship in the Math. The Master's relics had been brought from Balaram's house, and Sri Ramakrishna was worshipped daily in the worship hall. Narendra supervised the household. He was the leader of the monastery. He would often tell his brother disciples that the selfless actions enjoined in the Gita were worship, japa, meditation, and so on, and not worldly duties. The brothers at the Math depended on him for their spiritual inspiration. He said to them, "We must practice sadhana, otherwise we shall not be able to realize God." He and his brother disciples, filled with an aesthetic spirit, devoted themselves day and night to the practice of spiritual discipline. Their one goal in life was the realization of God. They followed to their heart's content the injunctions prescribed in the Vedas, Puranas, and Tantras for an austere life. They spent their time in japa and meditation and study of the scriptures. Whenever they would fail to experience the divine presence, they would feel as if they were on the rack. They practiced austerity, sometimes alone under trees, sometimes in a cremation ground, sometimes on the bank of the Ganges. Again, sometimes they spent the entire day in the meditation room of the monastery, in japa and contemplation. Sometimes they gathered to sing and dance in a rapture of delight. All of them, and Narendra particularly, were consumed with the desire to see God. Now and then they would say to each other, "Should we not starve ourselves to death to see God?" Monday, February 21st, 1887. Narendra, Rakal, Niranjan, Sarat, Sashi, Kali, Baburam, Tarak, and Sarada Prasanna were living in the monastery. All day the members had been fasting in observance of the Shivatri, which is the night of Shiva. On this day the devotees fast, spending the whole night in meditation, prayer, and other spiritual exercises. Sarat, Kali, Niranjan, and Sarada were planning to go to Puri the following Saturday on a pilgrimage to the sacred Jagannath. Jogin and Latu were at Vrindavan and had not yet seen the new place. Narendra had gone to Calcutta that morning to look after a lawsuit in which his family had been involved since his father's death. At 9 o'clock in the morning, M arrived at the Math. Tarak saw him and began to sing in praise of Shiva, Rakal joining him. They danced as they sang. Narendra had recently composed the song. Sashi finished the morning worship in the shrine. Sarat then sang about Shiva to the accompaniment of the Tanpura. Narendra had just arrived from Calcutta. He had not yet taken his bath. Kali asked him, "How about the lawsuit?" "Why should you bother about it?" Narendra replied sharply. Narendra took his bath in the Ganges and returned to the monastery. He carried his wet cloth and towel in his hand. Sarada prostrated himself before Narendra. He too had been fasting on account of the Shivaratri. He was going to the Ganges for his bath. Narendra entered the worship room and saluted the picture of Sri Ramakrishna, who was daily worshipped there as the deity. For a few minutes he was absorbed in meditation. Arrangements were being made to worship Shiva in the evening. Leaves of the bell tree were gathered for the worship. Bell wood was chopped for the homa. In the evening, Sashi, who was in charge of the worship at the monastery, burnt incense before the pictures of the various gods and goddesses. The worship of Shiva was to take place under the bell tree in the monastery compound. The deity was to be worshipped 4 times during the 4 watches of the night. The brothers assembled under the bell tree. Bhupati and M were present. One of the young members of the moth was in charge of the worship. Kali was reading from the Gita. Now and then he argued with Narendra. "Kali, I alone am everything. I create, preserve, and destroy." "Narendra, how is it possible for me to create? Another power creates through me. Our various actions, even our thoughts, are caused by that power." M to himself. "The master used to say, as long as a man feels that it is he who meditates, he is under the jurisdiction of the Adyakashti, the primal power. Shakti must be acknowledged." Kali reflected in silence a few moments and then said, "The actions you are talking about are illusory. There is not even any such thing as thought. The very idea of these things makes me laugh." Narendra, "The I that is implied in 'I am he' is not this ego. It is that which remains after one eliminates mind, body, and so on." After completing the recital of the Gita, Kali chanted, "Shanti, Shanti, Shanti." Narendra and the other devotees stood up and circled round and round the tree, singing and dancing. Now and then they chanted in chorus, "Shiva Guru, Shiva Guru." It was midnight, the 14th day of the dark fortnight of the moon. Pitch darkness filled all the quarters. Men, birds, and animals were all hushed into silence. The young sannyasis were clad in Gerua robes. The words Shiva Guru, chanted in their full-throated voices, rose into the infinite sky like the rumblings of rain clouds and disappeared in the indivisible Satchidananda. The worship was over. The sun, about to rise, was painting the eastern horizon crimson. In this sacred twilight, the conjunction of night and day, the holy Brahmanuhurta, the young worshippers, finished their baths in the Ganges. In the morning, the devotees went to the shrine room, prostrated themselves before the deity, and gradually assembled in the big hall. Narendra was clad in a new ochre cloth. The bright orange color of his apparel blended with the celestial luster of his face and body, every pore of which radiated a divine light. His countenance was filled with fiery brilliance, and yet touched with the tenderness of love. He appeared to all as a bubble that had risen up in the ocean of absolute existence and bliss, and assumed a human body to help in the propagation of his master's message. All eyes were fixed on him. Narendra was then just 24 years old, the very age at which the great Chaitanya had renounced the world. Balaram sent fruit and sweets to the monastery for the devotees' breakfast. Rakal, Narendra, and a few others partook of the refreshments. After eating one or two morsels, some of them cried out, "Blessed indeed is Balaram." All laughed. Narendra now began to joke like a boy. He was imitating Sri Ramakrishna. He put a sweet into his mouth and stood still, as if in samadhi. His eyes remained unblinking. A devotee stepped forward and pretended to hold him up by the hand, lest he should drop to the ground. Narendra closed his eyes. A few minutes later, with the sweetmeat still in his mouth, he opened his eyes and drawled out, "I am all right." All laughed loudly. Refreshments were now given to everyone. M looked on at this wonderful mart of happiness. The devotees shouted joyfully, "Jai Guru Maharaj!" Victory to the Guru. End of that day. End of today's reading.